Good morning. Abstinence. Experience strength and hope from members of Overeaters Anonymous. This one's entitled Island Oasis. I went to my first OA meeting 3.5 years ago with two dreams. The first was to stop compulsive overeating. The second was to travel. So far in recovery, I've kept off 13 pounds and have been around the world. After 18 months in the program, I had lost 10 pounds and had just landed a new job teaching college level English to members of the Navy, while deployed on a tender taking care of combat ships in the Persian Gulf. As I prepared to leave the States, I had no idea what to expect, nor even what countries my ship would be visiting, as that information was classified. The only instructions I got were I couldn't wear skirts on board. Naturally, I was sad to leave my wonderful OA home group, my sponsors, and the members I was sponsoring. But I planned to take my program with me. I heard that many ships had 12-step meetings, usually AA, nightly, but I suspected that my classes would probably meet in the evenings too, when the sailors were off duty. I worried about whether I'd be able to make the meetings and whether I could work an OA program with only AA support. In typical fashion, I found myself worrying needlessly about the following month's schedule of the ship on the other side of the world. The flight to the Philippines took 19 hours. After a brief rest, I got onto a military plane full of sailors and we headed for our next stop, Diego Garcia. Diego Garcia is a tiny island 7 degrees south of the equator in the middle of the Indian Ocean. As we landed, the island looked like a scene from South Pacific, a coconut grove bordering a clean white beach curving around a horseshoe-shaped bay. We were dying to get in the water, but everyone from the plane had to wait in a huge processing room. There were sailors from dozens of ships, and everyone's paperwork had to be processed in the maddeningly slow way of the military. In the midst of hundreds of blue and white uniforms, I happened to take a seat behind a woman just as she opened her briefcase to reveal OA pamphlets. I leaned forward and whispered, "I think we have something in common. I'm a compulsive overeater." She smiled and tapped her daily meditation book. "My higher power is really helping me out," she said. "I was praying to meet someone here. Amazingly, it turned out that we were en route to the same ship." We planned to attend an AA meeting together that night on Diego Garcia. I needed one. The temperature was over 100 degrees, and the bay that had looked so inviting turned out to be only 2 feet deep and was as warm as the air. After a day of walking in the jungle, fighting off the fat, ferocious mosquitoes, and paddling in 2 feet of hot water, I refused a few invitations to the officers' club and took my sunburned body to an AA meeting. There were 3 other people there as delighted to see us as we were to see them, as they don't get many visitors. The island is notoriously boring for people stationed there, and heavy drinking is the main activity. The 3 men we met that night were struggling to recover in the midst of that insanity, and doing a good job. Once I reached my ship, I learned that the AA meetings were held at 8 p.m., right in the middle of my classes. But my shipmate and I started an OA group that met whenever we felt the need, often every day. Navy ships, I soon discovered, are noisy and crowded places with a lot of unhappy people packed much too close together. This crew had been out to sea for 4 months, not even catching a glimpse of land for more than 60 days. Low morale showed everywhere. Meals in the officer's wardrobe were depressing and silent. I was never tempted to prolong them, and my students, though eager to learn, were exhausted by the endless work of supporting the smaller ships. Worst of all, we were at anchor, and the ship's weak air conditioning was no competition for the sun baking our metal ship. Some of my students worked in the engine room at 140 degrees. The temperature on deck, where a few of us sweated through aerobics, was usually 110 to 120 degrees. Down below in the crew's berthing, the heat was barely tolerable. After teaching, I would go on deck in search of a little coolness, but the night air was as hot as the days. I think this is the longest story I've read so far. Here's another full page coming. Jeez. Because no alcohol was allowed on board, sugar was the drug of choice. In every office or shop, I'd see sailors munching sweet junk food. The supply chef told me that one of his biggest problems was keeping the ship stocked with sodas, since the 1,100-person crew each drank an average of 5 cans a day. Since I couldn't have visitors in my stateroom, my OA friend and I met in her office. This tiny metal cubbyhole with harsh lights, no ventilation, and only a thin divider separating us from 2 other rooms became our sanctuary. Sharing the struggles of staying serene in such harsh conditions, we helped each other through homesickness and home meeting sickness. Before taking this job, I'd aided my abstinence by giving myself treats other than food, baths, walks, flowers, and occasionally new clothes or cosmetics. The problem was none of these things were available on board. We only had the big book, OA literature, our higher power, and each other. And it worked. My abstinence was as clean then as it's ever been. My time on the tender ended suddenly. One hot night, I moved to the upper bunk in hopes of getting some cool air from the fan. At 3 a.m., my phone rang, and I, half asleep and forgetting that I'd changed beds, jumped to get it. I fell 7 feet onto 1.5-inch plate steel, breaking my right wrist. People heard my screams several decks away. 24 hours later, with one arm in a cast and my bags packed, I stood on deck wearing a life jacket, a hard hat, and a harness, waiting to be hoisted off the ship by means of a crane inside one of those huge metal boxes usually used for burning garbage. My OA and AA friends showed up, having slipped away from their duties to say goodbye. We held hands and said the Serenity Prayer. I stepped into the burn box and began my long, painful journey home. The program, Goodbye, was a good start, and I knew that thanks to OA and the Worldwide 12-Step Fellowship, I would never be alone. It's from a member in San Diego, California. It's an 8.5-minute story. Ay, 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 ay. Have a great day. Be abstinent just for today.